Welcome back to the CAST series of instructional videos looking at construction and concrete material. In this video we're just going to briefly touch on the two main strategies for concrete construction, being in situ and precast concrete. Now, in situ concrete is simply concrete that is placed on site. It's placed in its plastic form and it needs a significant amount of preliminary work to make sure that the concrete is placed in exactly the correct configuration. Now, the delivery of concrete onto site is usually the final stage of a sequence of concrete construction. By and large, the majority of the work is spent leading up to the concrete pour, and it's all taken up in setting out the extent of the slabs, setting out formwork if it's a suspended construction, setting out the reinforcing, making sure that it's set out at the right height, and that the variety of different reinforcing bars lining up with the loads of stress are all done properly. So usually on the day of the pour, it's all hands on deck. There's a large team involved with making sure that the concrete goes in quickly, because what you do want to do is ensure that when the concrete goes in, it's not just left sitting there unprocessed. Now, the concrete will go off or start to cure quite quickly, and one needs to make sure to get a good finish on the concrete before it gets to a hardened state where you can't do anything more with it. Typically speaking, if the concrete is for flat work or on-ground work, the delivery can usually be direct from a pre-mixed concrete batching supplier and delivered in a truck, as you can see in the top left-hand corner, where the concrete is just delivered straight from the back of the truck through the chute, and then we have a series of people who are then using rakes and shovels to generally place the concrete, which is then followed by more precise work where it's smoothed out in a sort of a screeding or a leveling motion, and then with a final trowel to make sure that it's nice and flat. In the other two methods, on the top right hand corner, you can see a typical concrete delivery from a high-rise building that uses a crane. So in crane delivered concrete, it goes into this large hopper, which is then delivered in quite large batches. Now, this means that it's quite heavy work. You need a lot of people to keep pushing concrete around, but it means that you don't need sophisticated pumps to get the concrete up above the ground. In the bottom right hand corner, you can see at bottom right and also bottom left what's becoming, I guess, the most popular way of delivering concrete is with a concrete pump. Now, in this situation, the concrete truck, similar to the top left hand corner, will deliver its concrete into the back of a concrete pump truck, and these booms, which can be quite long, span over the top of buildings and often rise up several stories into a building, allow the concrete to be delivered exactly to the site and reasonably easily manipulated by one person, who can then spread the concrete around more easily, making it much more quickly to distribute and then start to flatten out the concrete. The other main delivery method is precast concrete. Now, in Queensland, or Australia at least, most of the precast concrete is used for infrastructure, for bridges and for large structures, and also for decorative or facade work. The concrete that's produced before it goes onto site is usually of a much higher quality, and it's done in factory conditions, so everything is very carefully controlled in the sense of wall panels and so on. instead of pouring concrete vertically, you can lay it on large beds horizontally, meaning that you can get a much better surface finish. In most precast factories as well, like you can see on the top left-hand corner, they will also have various machines that can polish the surface of the concrete so that you can get a high gloss finish, like you can see on the bottom right-hand slide. So the ability to work in the factory, work in controlled conditions, and in fact work on much larger daily cycles, in some instances 24 hours a day, gives great control, but it is limited. It works best with large runs of panels, and it's very difficult to get a lot of variety and diversity, I guess, in precast concrete without it costing a lot, because clearly if they're going to make specific molds of a very high quality, then in order to get the cost effectiveness of it, you need to get many panels out of the one mold instead of just remaking molds for every different panel. Now, the degree of sophistication in precast concrete is becoming greater as we get more, I guess, automation in the process, and using sort of digital design to fabrication techniques in making the molds, meaning that we can do it more cost effectively through a variety of different geometries and forms. This project in Kangaroo Point by Jackson Tees Architects, Scott Street Apartments, uses a precast system to make a decorative screen that has quite a harsh frontage to due east, so a lot of heat gain in the morning, but also a lot of traffic on that side. So whilst it's trying to shield the harsh facade, it's also very visible, so it wants to make a very decorative facade to the passing motorists. So in this instance, what looks like quite a sophisticated and quite a complex design is in fact comprised of 4, possibly 5 different or repeated units that are then stacked on top of each other. You can start to see the repeats going through, but the way that the design's been done is very clever, and it allows it to look more complex even though there is still a lot of repetition in there. What it does mean is that you can get a very high quality finish and a very high quality sort of architecture that is quite durable, that is self-finishing, i.e. that the concrete itself is the final aesthetic representation of the building. Now, a lot of precast work is also done on a much smaller scale. In this instance, we have bespoke tiling, which is done by a small factory called Chelmstone, who also makes bespoke landscape elements, using also a precast technique using a very dry stock. So the advantage of a dry stock or a pressed precast in this instance is that you can then strip the mold almost immediately when you make it. It's a little bit like making a sandcastle. Gives a very high quality smooth finish, and the cement content is actually quite small but adequate for it to set and to get a very hard and durable finish. So that finishes this video, which just gives a brief introduction to the 2 predominant modes of production, in situ concrete and precast, and there are many other resources that you'll find both available on Blackboard and other resources through the texts that have been recommended. Thanks for listening.